My name is Victor Younger, and I work with residential programs here at Cornell. I also serve as the Associate Director for Pre-Freshman Summer Program. And my colleague with me today, Dr. Kenneth Clark. And Kenneth and I and others from the institution have been working on a project. There are actually 5 different initiatives under the Vice President's office. And the committee that Ken chairs, is specifically focusing at the persistence and retention of African American men here at Cornell. And so what we'd like to do today is essentially just walk you through some of the research that we've done. We started out with conducting a focus group back in, I think it was 2013, roughly 36 students, men of color. And it was at that particular forum where we started to gather or put together some data as we think about some of the information that we'll share with you today. So we'll get started. So let me just highlight the fact that this task force for the retention of undergraduate black men, our task was to certainly working under the direction of the Toward New Destinations initiative. We were specifically focusing on to improve the graduation and retention rates for black students to parity with Cornell students. That number varies anywhere between 92 and 93%, but the issue that we're focusing on is the fact that our specifically African American men are not graduating at the same level in which other students are. We're looking at evaluating nutrition and recommend retention strategies. And we're looking to create an environment where undergraduate black men can thrive and be successful here at Cornell. So that was our charge, if you will, and the particular focus that we wanted to dive into. So just looking at some brief statistics, you'll see on the slide that 2004, all Cornell University men graduated at 90.3%, and non-URM men at 93%, and then obviously looking at black men at 80, let's just round it off as 81%. So there's a gap of 12% there. Following years is a gap of 15%, and then 2006, a gap of 8.6%. And then in subsequent years, we also continually see this trend where there are internal issues when we think about issues that happen within the classroom, as well as things that happen outside of the classroom that's impacting their ability to function at the capacity which all of our students have the capacity to do. So with that said, I will turn this over to Ken, and we'll go through this process, and at the end we'll talk about some recommendations.
Okay, so in the spring of 2013, in January to be specific, we, Victor and I and a number of other people attended the Men of Color Council's annual retreat in Rome, New York. And it was there we conducted focus groups, as he mentioned earlier, with 36 black men, 30 of which were current Cornell students and 6 who were Cornell alumni. The practice has been over the years, the Men of Color Council has held this conference, is for alumni to come back and return and share their experiences and serve as mentors and to current undergraduate students. And so, in gathering this data, and in preparing to gather this data, what we sought to do was to take an anti-deficit approach to this, to the matter of black men's retention. Historically, researchers have looked at students who fail and analyzed the data from the perspective of failure or struggle. But as we have been informed by the work of Sean Harper at the University of Pennsylvania and Terrell Strayhorn at Ohio State, they have indeed sought to look at what makes for black men's success in college. What are the factors that enable them to be able to successfully matriculate to a college or university? And so the purpose of the study was to seek feedback from these undergraduates and alumni about their success. And so there were several research questions that we that we were asking in this study. And among those questions were these. How were aspirations for post-secondary education cultivated among undergraduate black men who are currently enrolled in Cornell? What compels black undergraduate men to pursue leadership and engagement opportunities on campus? How do undergraduate black men manage to persist and earn their degrees despite transition issues, racist stereotypes, microaggressions, academic underpreparedness, and other negative forces? What resources are most effective in helping undergraduate black men earn GPAs above 3.0 in a variety of majors, which include the STEM disciplines, science, technology, engineering, and math? How do black men go about cultivating meaningful, value-added relationships with key institutional agents? There's some interesting demographics that we found as we looked at the information that was given to us from the focus groups. 13 of the 36 men were immigrants to the U.S., 10 were first-generation college students, and 13 were members of black Greek-led organizations, fraternities. What you see above are 5 themes that emerged from this study, and that were highlighted by the students and the alumni. Institutional support, personal support, involvement, competitive academic environment, and resilience. In terms of institutional support, students and alumni spoke of the importance of dedicated spaces that were integral to their success. Spaces such as Ujima, the Center for Intercultural Dialogue at 626 Thurston Avenue, OWADI, which is the Office of Academic Diversity Initiatives, the Africana. Alumni mentioned the former OMEA, the Office of Minority Educational Affairs, which has been divided into both WADI and 626 now as of 2011. They talk about dedicated staff and faculty who work in diversity programs. In fact, one of the persons mentioned is here with us, Kate Thompson, as one of the people who was integral to the success of students. And those who were committed to helping underrepresented students of color thrive. In particular, what was cited was the Men of Color Skills Seminar, which is co-taught by Kate and Cindy Van Essen, Applied Economics and Management. This is a course that's given for 1 credit in the fall, which has had as many as 40 students who have been enrolled as of last fall, in which students are given certain skills that enable them to be successful. They have the opportunity to meet with a number of people from a variety of professional fields who come in and give guest talks to the students, and then they have to do a final project which reflects the sort of accumulation of what they have learned over the course of a semester. They also mention the importance of financial aid. Most, if not all, participants in this study identify financial aid as a primary reason they came to Cornell. Special events and programs such as Diversity Hosting Weekend, the Unity Hour, the Men of Color Council Conference, the diversity programs in engineering, and a program called BOLD, Business Opportunities in Leadership and Development, all played a key role in their success. And the reputation of Cornell also was a factor for them. And the development of networks once here that enabled them, at the peer level, but also in terms of interacting with faculty, staff, administrators, and people outside of the institution who could help them, for example, get summer internships. All these played a role as well. Personal support. One of the important themes that the participants mentioned was the role that particular staff members played in their success. The staff members mentioned during the interview were almost always cited by more than one student. Their commitment to helping Black men succeed was apparent in the number of anecdotes students shared about their individual experiences working with these staff members. The mentoring also by upperclassmen of students played a role, but also in turn, the mentoring that a number of these students became involved with once they became upperclassmen with younger students also played a role in their success. It gave them a sense of giving back in return to what they, in relation to what they had received from mentors who were in place when they first arrived at Cornell. Involvement. And these are three of the components that were critical to students in terms of involvement. Because there are very few Black men at Cornell compared to the overall student body, there are roughly somewhere between 300 to maybe 350 at the absolute max Black men, and the numbers are pretty much even Black men, Black women, so there's over 600 Black students on campus, undergraduate, out of a student body of 13,000. So those numbers are relatively small, though on the other hand, it does lead to some degree of critical mass. But because those numbers, particularly as it relates to Black men, are relatively small compared to, say, 13,000, it's easy for Black men to feel isolated. The men interviewed, however, said that there were existing communities that they entered into that helped them to feel welcome and in which they felt they could thrive. Student organizations played a major role in helping Black men at Cornell find their community. And these organizations provided them the support they needed to succeed. They also shared, and again, that being role models to younger students helped them realize their own success. They mentioned student organizations such as SWAG, Students Working Ambitiously to Graduate, which is a program that's created with a focus on retention of Black men at Cornell. The Men of Color Council, MOCC, was mentioned. Greek letter organizations such as Alpha Phi Alpha and Kappa Alpha Psi were also important. Involvement in BSU, the Black Student Union, also played a key role. They also cited the reality of the competitive academic environment that is Cornell. They mentioned that a number of them were the first in their family to attend an Ivy League institution. 10 of the 36 interviewed were first-generation college students. They said that because they found themselves in this very competitive environment, that the need to set goals was a very important and common practice in which they participated. They talked about the positive effect of experiencing the tangible outcomes of their hard work and how that was of a benefit to them. When they were asked to explain how they knew they were successful, they talked about how indicators of success for them had to do with receiving internships, research opportunities, recognition from a faculty and staff member, and being on the dean's list. But they also talked about the reality in this competitive academic environment of having to deal with stereotype threat. Stereotype threat is the experience of anxiety that a person feels when they feel that they have the potential to confirm a negative stereotype about his or her social group. Stereotype threat has been shown by research to reduce the performance of individuals who belong to negatively stereotyped groups. I'll give you a historic case in point of a famous Black man who experienced stereotype threat in his graduate school education. When Martin Luther King Jr. attended Crozet Theological Seminary in Chester, Pennsylvania, where it was until 1970 when it merged with what is now Colgate-Rochester Crozet Divinity School, which is my alma mater, from where I earned my Master's in Divinity degree. When he arrived at Crozet, it was the first time he had been in a predominantly white educational setting, having been educated in the segregated schools of Atlanta and at Morehouse College, the preeminent African-American institution of higher learning. But it was when he arrived at Crozet, he talked about how he felt extremely self-conscious early on in his time there. He felt that he had to have everything in place. He dressed meticulously to begin with, but dressed even more so meticulously, to make sure his shoes were shined. He felt, even if he were a minute late to class, he felt this great anxiety because he was afraid of confirming a stereotype. That was the experience. And he writes about this in his book, Stride Toward Freedom, the first book he wrote, which was the book about the Montgomery bus boycott. And the chapter is called Pilgrimage to Nonviolence, is where he talks about this. And so, he experienced stereotype threat of that sort. And we know that the work of Dr. Claude Steele at Stanford, who spoke on campus just last semester about stereotype threat. His theory has been a key factor in helping to unpack the reality of this factor and the way that this can undermine academic performance and can undermine a person's sense of oneself. In the interviews, Dr. Steele's theory was mentioned. Participants felt that as black men in a predominantly white institution, it was important for them to work harder, even more so harder, so they would not fall behind their white peers. Many participants mentioned that this added pressure motivated them to succeed, but they also acknowledged that it was a factor that contributed to some of their peers not being able to succeed in Cornell. A lot of it has to do with just the individual and how the individual responds to the reality of stereotype threat and other factors that are related to race that can have a potentially negative impact. Participants found experiences with being stereotyped as athletes or hearing about racist acts on campus toward black students as disappointing and troubling. But by and large, most of them said that these were not major factors that prohibited them from succeeding at Cornell. Resilience is yet another theme that emerged from our conversations. They talked about how a lack of community and or involvement might lead to a student's early departure from Cornell. When they were asked about factors that helped them to be successful, the men talked about internal and external motivations. They talked about having a strong sense of self, persistence, and a connection to community. Several students mentioned that knowing themselves well, believing in themselves, listening to themselves, and being self-motivatable factors for their success. And they cited that these as characteristics that they could call upon to help them persevere through situations when they may have doubted their abilities or when they faced racism. This sense of self was also mentioned in the context of advocating for oneself and knowing when to seek help. When we gave this presentation yesterday to the Men of Color Colleague Network Group, which is a group that is focused on helping to retain staff of color at Cornell, Victor had mentioned how the importance, how this all kind of fit into a larger framework, this knowledge of self, in relation to negrescence theory, black identity theory, which was created here at Cornell in the 1970s by Bill Cross, who taught for over 20 years in Africana here from 1971 to 1993, and how that the sense of oneself and the sense of identity that one has is critical to one's success. But that even, say for instance, when one has these encounters with racism, which may create this, what Bill Cross called this encounter moment, this wake-up call, that in which one realizes, has this sort of aha moment in relation to their identity, their experience that they are being treated differently, say, from their white peers, that too can play a role in helping one to either rebound and to be able to determine how will I, deal with this and create and sustain a sense of self that will help me to succeed. The participants mentioned that Cornell offers a large range of extracurricular activities along with a highly competitive environment. And students talk about how, the fact that there's so many things going on and that this is a very competitive environment, that this can be a distraction at times from being able to meet their goals. But, and again, as cited earlier, this can have a dual effect. That on one hand, it could be a stumbling block, but other students used it as a stepping stone, as a motivator. And that, that coupled with networks of communities in which they were involved, mentors, their own persistence, and a strong sense of self, that these factors, if in place, would enable them to be able to succeed at Cornell. So now Victor is coming to talk about the recommendations that emerged from our study. And then after we go through these recommendations, we'll entertain questions and answers.
And certainly along the way, if you have any questions, feel free to ask as well. So as Ken covered a lot of information, just talking to our students and really understanding some of the institutional concerns that we have, as well as some of the individual concerns. So what emerged out of that as a committee, we really talked about some recommendations. So throughout the interviews, men described, as Ken said, their success and their ability to permeate different communities, to utilize resources on campus, and to establish a support network of friends, staff, and faculty. And by using these successful undergraduate black men as guides, the following recommendations emerged from this study. So looking at provide institutional support focused on the success of undergraduate black men. So make success of undergraduate black men everyone's responsibility, not just those who do diversity work. And as you well know, we experience that day in and day out because we are people of color. We are doing the work, but it's everyone's responsibility. Train staff and faculty to be supports and align the culture toward the success and the thriving of all students. Hire additional professional academic advisors in the colleges. Continue and grow financial resources to support summer research and professional career development. The other category, provide consistent, reliable support networks for black men that persist beyond the pre-freshman summer program and first-year experience. So provide more opportunities for students to talk with each other, with older mentors, about the challenges they are facing at Cornell. Create new and support existing communities of support to make students feel more connected and less overwhelmed. And teach students how to network and provide opportunities for networking to occur. And that's part of what Kate's class is doing, and that's what we are trying to encourage our students to do, is to network and don't be fearful of stepping outside of what we call your comfort zone. And obviously just educate accepted students about Cornell and its size, and prepare them for the big monster. And that's a quote that came from students within the focus group. They come from different environments around the country. To walk on campus and all of a sudden they're thrown into this environment. And when Ken quoted those essential numbers starting out, where at any given class that comes into our institution, we talk about roughly 70 to 80 African American men specifically in a class of 3,000. So when you look at that percentage spread out over this entire 700-acre plus campus, you lose yourself. You can't find yourself. Others like you. So the opportunity to understand how do we build that bridge of connectivity so that they don't feel alone, that the support is seen in many different ways. We also talked about, encourage greater alignment, enrollment in the intergroup dialogue project of OADI 626. This project specifically came out of its practice out of the University of Michigan. And in one of these particular cases, students are trained as class facilitators. And last semester, a topic on socioeconomic status, this semester they had 2 classes on race and gender. So essentially they're looking at different avenues of how to engage students so they themselves can actually practice certain skills, be active in the work and part of their own development. We also saw how much they learned and how far we've come as a group. And they talked about that as individuals as well. So the Men of Color seminar, which we spoke about, speaks from a variety of industries which share their paths to success. Assignments focus on building and improving leadership skills with opportunities to practice. And we also talked about encourage greater enrollment, as I indicated, in the intergroup dialogue project, which is co-sponsored by OADI 626. And then the other thing we thought would be a great opportunity is to actually conduct exit interviews. So when things happen or a situation happens at a particular college, how are we gathering that information and data that can inform some of the issues that our students are faced with? And how can that data inform some of the changes that perhaps we can implement and think strategically about aligning with some of our opportunities here at the university? And that's something that I think we will dig deeper in. And as we begin to think about partnering with the 7 different colleges, and as we gather this information, and I was talking with Kate the other day about the program that they are doing, and actually the information, how she can mine information about each and every student. To have that accessibility really creates more knowledge and opportunity for us to be proactive, as well as to gather information on the tail end, if in fact our students have to leave for particular reasons. We're working on, at this particular point, of thinking about swag as an opportunity to make it part of the orientation process. So right now, when we have 3,000 first-year students come on campus, or our students come on campus, there is nothing specifically targeted to capture that 90 or 80 students, men of color, before they are lost in a shuffle of 3,000. So we are talking about an opportunity to utilize, or for swag to be that connectivity point, where faculty and staff and other students and upperclassmen can be that first point of contact. Again, building community. And that's a common theme that happens in a large institution like that, like here, is the lack of the community, because we don't see each other in different spaces, and the masses are really not there to support the likeness of when we need support and to really leverage what we are trying to do with one another. We talked about creating a task force to focus on the faculty of color and retention and recruitment. There specifically, I quoted at our meeting yesterday, a stat that I heard over, I think it was in arts and sciences. Perhaps in the next 5 years, 5 to 10 years, 125 faculty will be retiring from that particular college. For me, or for us, as we think about an opportunity, there lies an opportunity for the institution to be intentional in seeking faculty of color, particularly in the largest college on campus. We also talked about developing faculty and staff mentor component in the Men of Color Network group. As Ken mentioned, we meet as professionals trying to align ourselves because we don't see each other in many parts of the campus. How do we support one another? If we're supporting one another, we can begin to fill in the gap with our undergraduate students as well as graduate students, so we can begin to connect with one another. And again, network and seek opportunities to share experiences. We also talked about provide data on admissions and matriculation, retention, and graduation for undergraduate Black men. So the more that we can dig into that 3rd or 4th year experience, I was looking at some information regarding first year class, coming in, we may have, again, about 80 to 90 students. The second year, we may lose 2. The third year, we may lose 4. The fourth year, perhaps we could lose 6 or 7. Now, we don't have the information right now that we can mine to say where that fallout is happening, in which college, what are the challenges. But that's part of the research that we really want to dig into, because when you talk about small numbers, and that's where students are on this continuum, every student counts, and we have to find a way to make sure that we are leveraging all of our resources from an institutional perspective, as well as what we're doing of trying to fill the gap in the work that we do. But again, thinking it from a holistic perspective, it is everybody's responsibility. And the last thought was to implement further research on the topic of thriving success at Cornell and post-graduation. As Ken mentioned, Sean Harper is doing some work. We're doing work here ourselves. So as we continue to think more strategically, share resources, have these conversations, I would venture to say that from our conversations and presentations, we're hearing ideas that can help us formulate our thoughts to move forward as we talk to Susan Murphy, who's the Vice President of Student Academic Services. And hopefully she will align these particular initiatives that we're talking about with Laura Brown as an example in undergraduate education. So having people at our top part of our institution talking to one another, creating ideas to where we're mining, we're on the ground, gathering data, how do we then take this data to the next step? And the work that we're doing, essentially gathering information, we'll continue to do that. But when you talk about implementation, it really is left up to the institution to take this information and fold it into some of the institutional processes that we currently have, as well as build on existing processes that currently work. And as we mentioned, I'd just like to make sure we give accolades to our team. Ken Clark as chair, Andrew Martinez, Leslie Marhoff, Risa Burrow, Nola Bay, who at one particular point was a part of our committee. So we are looking for faculty to join us. So if you're interested in being part of the committee, we're certainly welcome that opportunity. Gretchen Ryan with financial aid, and Thaddeus Talbot, who's a student, and myself. So we have diversity. We have diversity in our population. Sorry, Eric is joining us. Okay, Eric. Yeah, Eric. Oh, that's right. Eric Cree is joining us. So as we think about opportunities to engage our own campus partners, we're looking for resources for us to continue leveraging across campus, because at the end of the day, we can gather all this information, but how do we actually put it into action? And I think we've been working on this project for 1.5 years, and one can say, clearly, we've only scratched the surface. But it's a starting point, it's an initiative of the university. They set it as an initiative, we did the work, so now we'll bring it back. Hopefully, it will be engaged, and hopefully there's an opportunity to actually implement some of these ideas. So with that said, we'll stop and certainly entertain any questions.
I just had a question. You mentioned your focus group of 36, that there were about 13 international students and 13 first-generation students, and then 10 who were does that mirror the population of admission of students admitted? Do those break down? I mean, you mentioned you get 80 or 90 students, a black man per year for the AAA.
Yes.
Would you say a third are international?
I would say no. But there again, in the context of the students that we were interviewing, again, there was a small sample. We look over the 4 years. When I think about it, that in its totality, I would say it doesn't represent that. The other thing that we were talking about initially is that when we look at the African American male on campus, we haven't peeled that back to actually ascertain that being a Caribbean African American, a Western African American. So we didn't look at that data because that data is not looked at that way currently in the institution. So we are thinking about ways to actually dissect that speaks more specifically.
I just need a clarification. That third, were they international or were they first generation in this country? I interpreted it differently.
First generation, honors, generation college. Here.
There's two different
I'm trying to understand international, right?
Okay, so we said there were 36 students in focus group, 30 were undergraduates, 6 were alumni, 13 of the men were immigrants to the U.S.
So it doesn't make international.
Right.
That's the piece.
Yeah.
Okay.
And 10 were first generation students, and 13 were members of Greek letter organization.
Is there any sense how many of, say, the 80 or 90 that come in each year that are actually first generation go to college students?
In terms of the larger aggregate of entrance students, I'm not sure what those, I'm not sure what those numbers are.
It's fine, I just wondered.
And I think it's a valid question.
You know, Tracy and I are here from the Knight Institute, and we would love to have more, you know, interactions with student groups, and especially students that are interested in skill building. And we've often talked about ways that we can engage these groups, and you know, have them also take part in some of the skill building resources that we offer. And so we're really interested in how we can work, and you know, certainly going to be considered high school, certainly what we can do to help build up those connections.
Sure. I mean, we would be happy to, you know, come to the Knight Institute and make a presentation, I mean, if you would like, and, you know, engage in some further discussion about this. Part of what we're trying to do on the one hand is to build partnerships across the campus to make other institutional entities aware of this, while we're also very clear about the fact that the work that has been done is far beyond the scope of this task force currently constituted. You know, as Victor mentioned, you know, this has become an institutional priority at a number of levels. And what we are seeking to do through this data that we've accumulated and analyzed is to lay the ground, plant the seeds for a broader institutional engagement on this particular attention issue.
There was an interesting thing that happened a few weeks ago. So we actually engaged 47 faculty in a conversation of just sharing with them. We had 6 men of color. Pardon? No, this was separate. This was, we were working with Yael Levette, and we invited 47 faculty members to just listen to the conversation of these 6 men of color. And they talked about some specific things that have helped them to be successful, faculty that have been supported, things that have worked well for them, things that have happened in the classroom that have really been extremely challenging, and certain things outside of the classroom that has been equally as challenging. But what I walked away with in talking and just hearing feedback from the 47 faculty members that attended that, we also did a little survey, because that's the other piece, is that assessment to understand where people are and what we're doing work is so extremely important. So we had them to complete an assessment for us. And one of the things that was they gleaned extremely clear was that faculty in that particular realm felt that most of the students come here on an equal playing field. So essentially, you got here, and if you really need support, you know how to ask for it. And it was somewhat dismissive, if you will, of really not recognizing some of the tenets in which I don't think we're oblivious to when we pick up the paper, when we read about certain issues that are facing our country, that are facing our men that are being incarcerated, that's happening in our neighborhoods. It was quite interesting to hear that feedback. But I wanted to flip that switch, again, use it in a positive way to say, if that's your thinking, how would you then want to create a different experience for the students in the classroom. So in gathering some of the information, we were actually challenging them to become allies, to really think about when you're in the classroom and you're the only person of color and you single that person out, you're thinking that's okay, but to them, again, they're already challenged with so many other issues outside of the classroom, being marginalized, being challenged, and just trying to find their own identity. And then to feel sometimes the pressure of an experience in the classroom. Think about the context of that, but I also will be trying to educate them on the mere fact that the numbers don't represent something in which you believe that's on this campus. So we're not asking for any favors, we're not asking for any specific attention, but just recognize that the playing field isn't even. Intellectually we are, but to continue to succeed at this particular institution, we're asking that you recognize what we bring to the table and recognize how you can be a part of that experience. Al, is your question?
Yes, I do, Victor. What is the overall vision that you're trying to impart to young black men to enable them to be successful here at Cornell and after Cornell? The overall vision in, say, 25 words or less.
You know, if you're asking that from Victor's perspective, I can give you an answer, but I would like to just put that out there and hear everyone's perspective on what would you see of what we're trying to achieve? What would any African American or black young man would want to experience here in terms of success?
No, I'm talking about the committee that you're reporting on today.
Well, I think we sort of outlined what we intended to do at the beginning in terms of, like I said, second or third frame, in which we sought to find a way, one, to have a data-driven approach that will help us to outline factors that would enable black men to succeed at Cornell. From there, we seek, and as we've discussed just previously, we seek to promote this as a broad institutional program. This is more than what the task force can do. It's not, 7 people are not equipped to move the boulder up this mountain that is Cornell. It's going to take an institutional effort. It's going to take more than people of color doing this. And so I think that would now be my response to your question, and that I think what we've attempted to share here, I think, invites us in this room to consider what might be the implications of this data gathering, of this information.
And I'm sure we know the national stats. The graduation rates for African American men can vary anywhere between 36 to 40%. That's the national average. Cornell is anywhere between 75 to 80, 83%. So when you look at Cornell in this context, you're thinking, what's the problem? But obviously within the context of the Ivy League institutions, certainly the bottom line is our students should be graduating at the same rate of every other student at this institution. And there clearly are attributing factors that are hindering their intellect to bring their whole self to the table, to intellectually engage themselves in the capacity that any other student can, but having to wrestle with things that they don't necessarily bring, but perhaps are being imposed upon them based upon the way the institution functions.
And that, what we're saying too is that while graduation rates hover anywhere between 80 to 83% based on the statistics we shared, and say if you put that over against national figures, that's great. If you put it in the context of Cornell, it's behind. When you've got overall graduation rates at 92% for white males, you've got black women graduating at a 92% clip. But we're only graduating somewhere between 80 to 83% of black men. And so we want to gain, we are promoting an agenda that enables us to achieve parity. And that was part of what was highlighted in the statement, in the one of the early frames about, just what our task force is charged to do.
Yes,
Hey, looking at the numbers, Cornell is graduating black men at twice the rate of the rest of the nation. Cornell has a solution that perhaps they can impart to the rest of the nation. Have you thought about that? Because we're doing something that the rest of the nation is not doing. Even HBCUs, we're graduating black men at higher rates than HBCUs. We have a solution.
We do, well, in an incipient sense, perhaps we do, but what we haven't figured out is how do we bridge that 12 to 10% gap that exists in our context. If we can, figure out what's happening at home, then we can spread this abroad. But we got, part of what we got to figure out is how do we bridge this gap that exists? While, and indeed, as you say, it is double the rate of what we see nationally, of what we see in many cases even in historically black colleges and universities. But, but we've got a particular problem in our particular context that we need to resolve, and I think, that's the challenge.
Yes, Terrell.
I would also like to add the comment that it's not just about the graduation part. I think that if you put it in the context of these students are here and they're graduating, I came from a former institution where the black students there, before I started working for Cornell, they were graduating at a decent rate, but they weren't being successful. I mean, the student body for black students, the average GPA was about 2.5. And these students weren't going. I had students who, were applying for post-bac programs and could not get into med schools, or couldn't get internships, or couldn't even, they were graduating from a top business school and couldn't get a job. So I think it's not to say, it's great to say, yeah, these students are graduating, but I also think it's another eye to look at and say, yeah, are these students being successful while they're here at this university, getting the internships, getting involved in the research opportunities. And then I think there's something to be looked at when you're looking at the experiences of these students. What are they going through while they're here? And I think that's more important to say, or it's equally as important to say that these students are graduating.
Yeah, exactly. And in fact, just from what feedback students and alumni gave us, it's sort of indicative. They mentioned internships, they mentioned dean's list, they mentioned these other factors, which really are talking about not just simply retention or graduation, but really a quality of academic life, a quality of networking, a quality of connections that kind of lead to other things that extend and implicate their lives beyond Cornell. And so those are very things that sort of emanated from their comments. And so, I think you're absolutely right in that, in terms of just, success is more than just being able to flip the tassel on the commencement day. It's about, what it leads to beyond. Yes, Kate?
Sorry.
No.
I think one of the other good things about this work and other work that's happening right now, when we're looking at resilience of black men and other populations of color, is that people are actually seeing what those pieces are. Because I don't think Cornell has anything to take out to other institutions, because I don't think Cornell has worked really at identifying what those pieces are that help students, especially black men, really succeed. I think it's been hit or miss for a very long time. And so now we're saying that it's a population important enough for us to say, with that everyone counts, what are the things that we're doing well? I don't think the average advising office can answer that right now, and so that's the challenge. And then how do we replicate the things that whoever's doing well in any college across the university? And until we understand that, we don't go out there with the foot.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we got a lot of internal work.
Absolutely. Yes, sir. Chief?
Yes, I just wanted to second what Mr. Jackson was stating over here. I'm physically a grad student now, so I can speak from that perspective of it's not necessarily about getting to the end of the tunnel of graduating, because that's ultimately going to happen, but it's really the experience and the process of that. And, it's challenging getting research opportunities, some of the things that you have to deal with within the classroom that you really can't explain to someone else, because unless it's someone, a man of color, that can understand what you're going through. So this is coming to something like this and understanding this outreach and knowing that it's being addressed is very important. So for me, it's more about the experience and just challenging trying to get certain things. Sometimes you have to go that extra mile that you should not have to do things in front of your counterpart of your other students. And so I just want to kind of put that out there just to second that it's real, it's there, and I experienced it personally.
And there are institutions, there across the country, Ohio State, their Todd Hill Multicultural Center, Texas A&M, VCU. There are different models of success that's out there. And as we glean into those different models of success, and I was reflecting on this thinking, okay, certainly we have different components of some of those entities that are around the country. They are decentralized. Perhaps if we strategize of how we can take some of these specific successes and practices that are implemented already on campus, i.e. as we're talking about the program, the class that Katie and Cindy had, the SWAG organization, MOCC, holding financial aid seminars. When we look at all these different success factors that are happening at places like the Todd Bell Center, to where it's under one particular roof, where they are really focusing on and being intentional, obviously, of taking care of those students, and they're reaping the results. But I'm not saying that model necessarily fits at Cornell, but there are different models that exist that we should just say, we should look at, evaluate. We're Cornell, and we need to look at these options. And I think that's the other piece that we're hoping to maybe evaluate is the successes, whether they're Ivy League or not, if they're working. It makes sense for us to try to find a way to create that. And perhaps it already exists. We have to be intentional on building on what already exists. And that's where the true support of the institution is required in order for that intentionality to happen.
One of the things that we have done, in fact, we did not fold it into this presentation. We will eventually. We actually, Risa Nelson Burrow and a student of hers did a benchmarking exercise to look at a variety of institutions, HBCUs, Research One institutions, Ivy League institutions, about 19 to 20 in all, to look at what sorts of supports were in place for black men. Whether these were, say, student organizations, black mental organizations, structural support in terms of specific types of programs such as the Todd Bell program at Ohio State that were in place for black men, and it yielded a wide range of results. We are trying to determine just how we can utilize that data, incorporate that, for instance, in this presentation. But that's sort of a step in that direction in relation to what Victor was saying, so that we can get a view of what other institutions are doing, and what is it from that benchmarking that we can appropriate here, and that we can recommend would be appropriated here. I realize time is upon us, but are there any last comments, questions?
I have just a logistical question. Is there a study, or is anyone tracking why men of color lead? I love the panel that I saw a month or so ago, guys that were here that were
recommended, that are part of our recommendations, is to be able to have to encourage that sort of those sort of exit interviews to determine that. What that will take is cultivation of relationships within the colleges to find out who might be the persons within the respective colleges who could help to make that happen.
Or checking GPA, see if it was perhaps an academic.
Yeah, I think there are a wide range of factors as to why that might be. We just don't have hard information on that. But that's, I think that could be, if that could be structured in a way so that can yield some information, we can ask questions about whether it's academic, whether it's personal, whether it's financial, whether it is just the environment, the culture, and other factors. That's the type of information we need to try to discern what leads to this happening. And particularly, what we have been able to ascertain is that after the third year, something in particular happens with a number of black men, which leads them to leave. What's that about? Why after being three?
Just to build on that, this is one of the things that we've been talking a lot about at the Knight Institute, and this is for all, more broadly speaking, students who are struggling, we'll say, from all different groups. We're noticing faculty contacting us to figure out how to build resources for students who are coming at us in the third year, and it's a very strange phenomenon. So I think that it is not atypical on one hand, but one of the things that we're starting to notice anecdotally is that these are students who were really struggling GPA-wise, freshman and sophomore year. They can't handle the reading and writing challenges of the junior and senior levels. And we can look back and say, wow, these are students that we would have really worked productively with in all of our different support services, skill building courses. But we also realize that we have a remedial reputation, and that's hard for us to reach out to students when they're first coming in. We don't want to undercut their self-esteem. We want them to feel great about who they are. At the same time, I really keep going back to this idea about knowing yourself. And part of that is about knowing yourself, who you are as an individual, and feeling great about all of the wonderful things that you're bringing to this campus. But another part of it is knowing and thinking honestly, I think, about what your academic strengths are and what they aren't. And that self-assessment can be really hard for students who are trying to overcome the stereotype threat and real racism or other isms that they're experiencing on campus. And so we are really struggling to figure out ways to present ourselves differently to students. On one hand, knowing that we want to have, I also was at that presentation with the young men a month or so ago. It was wonderful. I learned so much from them. One of them was that they need separate spaces where they feel like they can be safe in an enclaved environment. On the other hand, they need to feel that they are welcomed in inclusive and integrated spaces. And so we are trying to find ways to create those spaces in the Knight Institute and all of the different ways that we interact with students. And we're feeling frustrated. And so we would love to interact more with those of us, others in the room, to help us problem solve.
Sure, absolutely. Well, we would certainly welcome a conversation with you. We meet as a task force. We typically would have met today except for this presentation. But I will, be in touch with you.
Yeah, usually task force to me means like temporary, and you're right, 7 or 8 people can't do this. It's an institution.
Yep.
So in terms of next steps regarding Susan Murphy and Laura Brown, what will be happening as far as you know as of today? Because a year and a half from now, are you still going to be giving presentations like this with recommendations and nothing implemented?
Well, that remains to be seen. Part of that will be, one aspect of that will be answered when we do have our meeting with Susan sometime next month. And then what emerges from whatever interaction, for instance, that she and Laura would have. We also, too, as a task force, are trying to determine what our next steps will be. you know, the focal point of our mission largely has been related to one, gathering this data, then sort of kind of cleaning that data up for it to be publicly presented. And now we are, you know, beginning to, you know, grapple with, you know, what are our next steps? You know, particularly given the fact that our task force is, in fact, a subcommittee of the Student and Academic Services Diversity Council. So there's, you know, there's ongoing work there, and as long as, for instance, this initiative is one of 5 diversity initiatives that the division has, you know, we will continue, there's a reason for our being. I mean, you know, even beyond the data gap. It's a question of what the next steps will be, and we are in the process of discerning that.
And just one other thing real quick. The University of Virginia at Charlottesville, do you know if Risa contacted or looked at their data? The only reason I ask is because they're known to be a leader
I think we did look at Virginia.
at Charlottesville.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, Eric, last question.
This is going to help me answer the question or not, but I know within the libraries, I work in the libraries, you know, I've been having this kind of conversation with my higher ups for over a year, and I know they want me to get involved. I hear Tracy saying kind of similar things that they've been talking about at the Lions Institute. So they it has to happen in so many different fronts. That's why when they come into the present to the different communities, it's on the community to be active as well, and not just let these 8 or 9 people within this task force.
Oh, no. I never said 8 or 9 people. It's way
No,
more.
I'm not just saying that. It's on us. That's what I'm saying.
Right. It's on the institution.
Departments. I think that's the next step. That's the next step.
Yeah, I mean,
That's
no, I think that's right, Eric. Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think, you know, the task force determining what next steps this takes is one thing, but there's a larger sort of implicit institutional mandate that.
I'm showing your family.
This is Malik, my 3rd child, from a few months ago. Although we can see that next week for all we know. All right.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Oh, no, it's okay.
Really?